All right, let's continue here with updating our user data in our real-time database, which is in Firebase. The very first change that we need to make is in our Firebase, go into real-time database and click on rules and make this rules read and write true so we can update our database without any restrictions. And later we need to change this so not everybody can update our database if they don't have any permission or they have no credentials. But for now, we are gonna go with this settings. In Firebase, once the user logs in, we get a user ID, which is also called UID. We can use this UID to communicate with our database here. And as you see, we have a database here which is not related to those accounts that we just logged in. I had it from before. So we can have two approaches. One is that we create our tables like this, our object like this in advance. So it would be database first. In my case, I'd like to go with code first based approach. So we don't need this, and I'm going to delete this one. So now let's go ahead and start our application with creating a user model, and I'm going to show you why we need that user model. So let's create a model here. Let's create a file, new file, and we call it user.model.ts. Okay. Now in this model, we can have an interface, which I'm going to export it, interface, and let's call it user. Okay. Now we have an UID of type string. We have name of type string, and let's duplicate this one for 3 more. We have an email. We can have is admin if the user is admin, and this one is going to be boolean photo URL of type string. Okay, we are all good. Now we can use this model when we are updating our database. Let's go ahead and close this one. Now, inside my user services, I'm going to have another method here. Let's call it update user. This method is going to take a user from our firebase.default.user, and this method returns nothing. Now we want to access the Firebase database table which we have here. Okay. In order to do that, I'm going to use this dot. Okay. Here I don't have my database yet. So let's go ahead. Let's go up here and inject our database into here. So let's have a private field. And let's call it DB, for example, and of type Firebase AngularFireDatabase. So good. Now, using AngularFireDatabase, we can access our database. Okay, now I can use this DB dot. I want to get an object only. Okay, so object. This object is going to be of type user. Okay, this user is coming from the model that we just made. See, this is imported from my model, right? So this user is different than this user. This user is coming from Firebase database, okay, as we had it before here. But this one is the type of my object, basically. The reason we made this user model is that we want to have IntelliSense as well as taking advantage of strongly typed feature of TypeScript, because TypeScript, unlike JavaScript, is a strongly typed language. So we make no mistakes. We get the errors before the compile time. That's why we are using this user model. What we are gonna get is I want to have a table called users, and in that table I'm going to say plus user from here, user dot. Now instead of display name that we used before here, I want to get UID, which is the ID of my user who logged in. So I want to get either of these IDs. So if this is the ID, then update the database based on this ID, or if this is the ID, update my database based on this ID. And let's go back. Okay. Now I want to update my database, right? Let's have an object here. Now I want to store the UID. I get it from user.uid. I want to store the name and update it from user.displayName. I'd like to get my email and store it in my database from user.email. So you see, this part is where I have in my database, real-time database, and here is what I get from Firebase credential after the user's logged in. So we, instead of, for example, we had this display name to show it to the user on the navbar, but now I'm storing the same display name in the name in my real-time database. So anytime that the user logs in, their name is going to be updated based on their name that they have updated or registered with Google. So if they change their name on their Google account, our database is going to be updated with the latest info. Now let's go ahead and say I have another field. It's called as admin. Okay, but I'm going to have it false. Now anytime a user logs in, this value is going to be changed to false. So even if I want the user to be an admin and to be true, but it's going to be updated, we have to have another update with an if statement. Then we need to go here and say if, for example, my user.user UID is equal to, I don't know, 123, let's say. Okay, then go ahead and perform this update. Otherwise, and you can say else, go ahead and do the update without this admin. So you're gonna remove this admin in the else part. Okay, so it doesn't change. Now for this code, I'm going to just declare my admin manually in the database itself on my Firebase control panel. Okay, so in this case, I'm going to have this out, and let's have also photo URL, and this can come from user.photo URL from my Google Firebase, my Firebase credentials basically. Alright, let's go ahead and use this method that we just created in auth service. Why do we use it here? Because we want to update our database right after the user logged in successfully. Okay, so here I'm going to use it then, which means then after the user logged in. Then here I'll have a credential. Okay, and this credential goes into if this credential exists, which means if the user has logged in successfully. Now go ahead and use that credential. So where should we use it? We should inject a private user service of type user service, and now we can use that method. Okay, this dot user service dot and update user. Now we can use that credential.user. Okay, this user is coming back from our firebase.user. Okay, we are getting this credential from AngularFireAuth, and then we are getting the user from it. We pass it into our method as an argument, which is here, and then we have all those data to store inside our database table and update our object basically. Now let's go ahead and log in and see what we get in our database. As of now, my real-time database is empty, no table in it. Now let's go ahead and log in. I'm going to log in with this one. Okay, let's go ahead. See, I have a table here with all those credentials. Beautiful. Now let's go ahead and log in with the other one. So I log out and log in again. Okay, I have another object with all those names and values. All right, let's check mark the jobs that we have done. So we haven't missed anything. We have created this one. We use this method with that argument. We used AngularFireAuth with then operator. Then we use this service. And at the end, we updated our Firebase database. All right, we are ready for the next section.